and welcome to Two Profs in a Pod. I'm Tenisha Baca, Communication Professor at Glendale Community College.
I'm Beth Ayers, Composition and Literature Professor at GCC.
And we both hold faculty developer roles on our campus as well. And today we are going to talk about civility.
Yay.
Yay! I'm so excited to talk about civility. I think this is definitely an important topic to talk about on so many levels. I think personal level, professional level, academic level. And we're talking about this because we are definitely living in a world where more and more people are not practicing civility towards one another. And I think it's something that we definitely need to talk about. Beth, what do you think about that? Why do you think we need to talk about this?
Well, I think everybody realizes that conversations about civility are happening on college campuses nationwide because, one of the big reasons is because of all the controversial speakers that have made big news that have shown up on college campuses only to have been met with uncivil behavior. So it seems natural for us to have a conversation a little bit about this. And plus, we're in classrooms with young intellectual minds, and maybe there are things that we need to say to our students or demonstrate to our students or encourage them to think about when it comes to civility. So what does the research say?
So what the research says, of course, when we usually get into this section, I love definitions. I think they're great. So I found this one definition. The source is unknown. I'm not really sure where the source came from. But I found this definition of civility, and the definition that I got was it's the state of cultural refinement associated with good citizenship.
That's so interesting. Can I add a little bit to that?
Yes, please. Yes.
And this does jump into a piece of research that I found about civility. And that is an article titled "Civility in the University Classroom, an Opportunity for Faculty to Set Expectations." And it's from 2014, but it brought up something about civility, and it mentioned students coming into class late as being uncivil. Ooh. And I wanted to just throw that into this definition that you said is a state of cultural refinement associated with good citizenship.
Yes.
And to maybe mention that the definition could be really, really wide, because I don't think I would have thought of coming in late as being uncivil. Maybe unless it's every single class period.
Right.
On a regular basis.
Right.
And maybe other behaviors accompanying it. But anyway.
Well, no, I'm really glad you brought that up, because in doing research for this, I saw a TED Talk. It was a TEDx talk from Whitefish, I believe, that happened, from a woman by the name of Diana Dameron. And the title of her talk was "The Force of Civility." And she actually talked about being late, how that's one of the things that she struggled with. And how there was one moment when she was late to a party and her husband was driving, and she was really apologetic because this is not the first time that she's been late. And the husband was silent and didn't say anything when she was trying to apologize. And he made a comment about her being late. And it was one of those things that he made the comment about how it came across as if other people's time was not important, and how her time was more important to her than it was to other people. And he considered it disrespectful. The other guests considered it disrespectful. But she made the point that that act of disrespect was, in fact, uncivil. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up in that article, because it was definitely referenced in that talk.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think when I think of what civility means, it's more, I think I go directly more toward how we treat people and what we say to people, and maybe more kind of overt behaviors in speech. Right. I think that's what I think of.
Right. That's what I think of too. Absolutely. Yeah. But not necessarily acts of disrespect like being late.
Yeah.
So especially when we
But I get that.
It. Yeah, I definitely get that.
I get that. And
but what's interesting is that Diana Dameron, the one I just mentioned in that TED Talk, she gave her own definition of civility. And she actually described it as the consistent implementation of respect. And I really love the use of the word consistent, right? It's a consistent sign of respect. So she's just focusing on like respect and disrespect. So that could be verbal, right?
Sure.
Like, I don't like you, get out of my face. Or it could be nonverbal, like being late.
Okay.
So I feel that she provides like a broader definition of it. So that's one definition. And then another definition I came across was actually from another TED Talk. It was a TEDx talk through Napa Valley. It was titled Civility by Shelby Scarborough. And her definition was noticing the needs of others without needing to be noticed, which I thought was interesting. So I think there's several different definitions that are pretty broad, but it seems like all of the definitions come back to one of the most important things, which is respect.
Yeah, and I like that we're trying to work in a broad definition, and I especially like, and what I hear that's common in all of them is thinking about other people.
Yes.
That's what I hear in all of them.
Yes. Being considerate of other people, being mindful of other people, being respectful.
Yeah.
Right. And this is not a new idea.
No.
I mean, it is not something that's brand new. We're talking about be respectful, be kind. This actually really goes way, way back. So in doing some research, it took me all the way back to George Washington, the very first president of the United States. And what has been addressed as George Washington's rules of civility, because George Washington actually copied on paper what was called the Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. And they were actually 110 rules. They're 16th century rules intended for young men like George Washington. And they were part of teaching materials from teachers to help them to build character. So George Washington wrote these down. There were 110 of them. And George Washington wrote these down, and now they are addressed as George Washington's Rules of Civility. So there are 110. We don't have the time for me to list 110.
We can't go over those?
No, but if you really, really, really want to look at it, in our show notes, you'll definitely see the article that I found it through, which was through NPR. It was called George Washington's Rules of Civility. It was posted May 11th, 2003. And what struck me, I'm a nerd, and I went through all the rules because I'm a nerd, so I had to read them. Some of them are really weird and strange for our time.
Okay.
But the most important ones I thought were the first two. So the first one was every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. That was number one. Number two, when in company, put not your hands to any part of the body not usually discovered. Was another one. So I know Beth's giving me the side eye.
Here's why I'm doing that, though, and I have to say this, and I'm going to look up these 110 rules because I find it very interesting, because I just finished reading the book Never Caught, The Washington's Relentless Pursuit of the Runaway Slave Ona Judge. So I learned some things about George Washington that changed some of my conceptions of him that I've had since grade school. Oh. Based on his treatment of some of his slaves. So this is interesting that he's got rules of civility and decent behavior, because I didn't exactly encounter that in the book that I just read. And we could save that for another episode, and maybe one of our listeners is a history professor, and they could maybe comment on that a little bit. But it's a really, I recommend the book.
But then you saying that, Beth, makes me think of like another thought. Like, we talk about rules of civility, and we talk about rules of respect. But then we think about, well, who has the right to have that respect?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So we talk about being civil, and maybe it's like, okay, well, we'll be civil to people who look similar to us.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, there are certain groups who can get that respect, and then there are other groups where it seems like it's free range to be like, well, I don't consider you to, I'm not going to respect you, because sometimes there are instances where if you're viewed not as a person, or if you're viewed as the other, or if you're viewed as property, like slaves were back in that time, you weren't considered a human being.
Right.
So if you're considered property, then the rules of respect more than likely do not apply to you.
They did not apply. No.
And that's unfortunate and sad. But when you mentioned that, that's the thought that came to mind for me.
Yeah. I'm glad you included that. I really am going to look those up.
I know. I need to look up your book.
Because I
need to go get it.
I'm just dying to find the some more irony.
Well.
Thank you. Oh, no. Poor George Washington.
Oh,
okay.
George Washington. All right. So that sounds like another podcast.
Maybe.
So the next piece. Other things that we're going to add to this, let's see, when it comes to... See, now I'm a little bit off.
You want to talk about the communication perspective?
Yeah, I'll talk about the communication perspective, because my approach to this is from a communication professor's perspective. Communication is all about our interactions with each other. So, of course, we focus on respect. And incivility is an issue, especially in communication. And in our minds, in my communication field, incivility, as far as being disrespectful or rude to people, can come across as what we consider unethical communication. And unethical communication is communication that we might deem as wrong, right? If it threatens people, if it's hate speech, if it's defamation, then that is absolutely, yes, it is completely unacceptable. It's definitely incivil. We consider it, in my field, to be unethical communication, to the point to where my association that I'm a member of, called the National Communication Association, has actually penned a credo of ethical communication that I believe was drafted in 1999. And it just takes a stand against that type of behavior. Not saying that, like, for example, that the association doesn't stand against free speech. Free speech is very important. Freedom of speech is absolutely something that's valued, right?
Yes.
But there is a certain point where we can't necessarily support things like hate speech and defamation. Does that person have the right to say that? Yes, they do, right? You can stand on the street corner and say terrible, terrible things about people. That is your right. But there are consequences for that. And everyone doesn't necessarily need to condone that behavior. So when it comes to me in the classroom, I'm always encouraging students to speak, but be mindful and to not cross those lines. Because when you cross that line, then it is unethical communication. And what we stand for in communication is ethical communication, where we want that constructive, interactive behavior, right?
I'm going to jump in and ask you a question here, Tenisha.
Yes.
I like that idea of ethical communication. And do you have something in your syllabus that talks about how students should interact with each other? And do you link it to this ethical communication guideline?
In my syllabus, I have a section that talks about how the type of classroom environment that we want: positive, constructive, and safe. I think that's the most important thing, is that it needs to feel safe.
Okay.
But I don't have a link to the credo of ethical communication. But ethics, it's definitely mentioned in the textbooks.
Right.
And there have been some instances where I've even passed out the credo. I don't pass it out every semester, but in, I think, every textbook, ethics is mentioned in, like, I think nearly every communication class, whether it's small group communication, interpersonal communication, even public speaking.
Right.
So ethical communication is a really big deal for us.
I like that. And teaching online, I always include some sort of statement about how to interact with each other. And they're mostly doing it in writing, right? In a discussion board or something like that. But I like the idea of bringing ethics into it, because that makes them think about their choices a little bit more than, say, like a do and don't list.
Right.
Which doesn't leave room for thinking about it.
Right.
So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in the credo, it's going to be linked in our show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in it, I love the statements that are here on this credo. I'm gonna read some of them. The very, very first one is, we advocate truthfulness, accuracy, honesty, and reason as essential to the integrity of communication. Another one is, we endorse freedom of expression, diversity of perspective, and tolerance of dissent to achieve the informed and responsible decision making fundamental to a civil society. And then another one, and I'm not going to read every one, this will probably be the last one that I'll read, is which is one of my favorites, is that we condemn communication that degrades individuals and humanity through distortion, intimidation, coercion, and violence, and through the expression of intolerance and hatred. That's my favorite one.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like how the second and the third work together.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So being tolerant, but then being tolerant of different perspectives, but then the third one, laying out some boundaries, though.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
If it's demeaning,
right.
if the speech is or behavior is demeaning, then that's not
it's
ethical.
not ethical.
It's not
right?
ethical.
It's not considered right, because
Right.
when we consider ethics, there's 3 questions we have to ask. Is it right? Is it fair? Is it deceptive? We're always asking those questions when it's connected to ethics. So if it's not right, if it's not fair, and especially if it's deceptive, then we don't have to stand for that.
Yeah. I love it. Are we moving on then to what we say?
Sure. What do we say? What do you say, Beth?
Well, as you and I were talking earlier, I did talk about feeling a little bit torn slightly, just because of provocateurs we've heard about in the news that seem to want to cause other people to maybe engage in uncivil behavior just by inflammatory speech and saying and professing abhorrent ideas. And so I guess that line between something so completely abhorrent and yet wanting to allow everybody free speech, that's a really tough line.
Right.
And, for me personally, I've heard, I've heard speech that I would consider to be uncivil in places you wouldn't expect it. Like, I'm just going to say it, like in churches.
Yes.
And I know that words can cause psychic damage. They can cause spiritual damage. So, I think it's especially important when people are young and they can't remove themselves from settings, right? As adults, we could walk away from that kind of speech or speak back and say something in opposition to something that we don't like, and hopefully in a civil way.
Right.
But I think it's a complicated issue, and I have not resolved all of my feelings.
And I think that's very honest.
Yeah.
I think that's just an honest way to feel about it, right? It's like having this love of speech, but not the love of what it brings out in people, right? And where it comes out. Places like churches or classrooms or our own homes or just randomly going to McDonald's and overhearing conversations that people have and just a lack of courtesy of who is around is like, I am shocked and floored by some of just the outright uncivil behavior that I've been seeing from people lately. Like, and you would think that you're dealing with children who don't know better, but I'm seeing grown people like who should know better not to say and do these things, and yet they're doing it. And it's really frustrating because growing up, I was taught you don't talk to people that way. You need to be respectful of others, right? Treat people how you want to be treated. That's like the most basic rule,
right?
That I learned when I was 2. It's like the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. And people are running around kind of just forgetting that. And I don't know if people have just kind of forgotten, or maybe I don't know, like
It's
you
not
see
important.
a lot of it in the media, right? Like, you know, confession, I like reality TV. Like there was a time where I was like hardcore watching, you know, Real Housewives of Atlanta and Real Housewives of New York and watching like all of this reality TV. And after a while, it's like I kind of had to stop watching most of it because, well, why was I entertained by it? Oh, because of the drama, right?
Yeah,
People being
right.
mean to each other, people saying crazy, outlandish things, and me kind of laughing at it. But really, the truth of the matter is that, well, this is terrible behavior. And I think it's very easy to absorb that behavior if you're watching it on TV.
Well, and we know that they're trying to get viewers.
Yep.
To sell advertising.
Yep.
To make money.
Yep.
And that it's not real.
Right.
Right. So I won't mention who, but I do have a family member who was on a reality TV show.
Really?
And they would stop the camera and say, "Can you do that again?"
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
So if you want a lot of people to watch and you're going to do it again, it's going to be more emotional and more dramatic.
Right.
Than maybe the first time.
Right.
Or let us give you all this alcohol and then say it. You know, now let's record.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
that's hard because we watch TV and we see people, and it's real. And I think for young people, it's
Absolutely.
easy to think that that is reality.
Right. And that it's okay.
Yeah.
To treat people that way. You know, and it is in reality TV. You know, I remember watching some shows and, you know, people have drinks and then next thing you know, drinks are thrown, wigs are coming off, nails are coming off, shoes are being thrown. It's all types of craziness. Wow. But you know what, though? I think what's interesting is that it's not just in reality TV. Well, because some people might think, oh, well, that's just trash TV. But if you look at the news and a lot of stuff that's getting attention in the news, and I think the article you brought kind of mentioned sound bites. That's what gets attention. So the more outrageous things that you can say, you're going to get that attention, right? So, and people will see this on behavior, and it's not just random people on the street. We're seeing it with our leadership, right? And I remember watching this video on CBS News. It was posted, I think, in 2011. It was talking about, you know, civility in the workplace and how more and more people were becoming incivil and there's bullying and et cetera. And how it was mentioned that a lot of that really starts with the leadership. And if the leadership is not modeling that behavior, then the employees or whoever is watching thinks, I don't need to model that behavior myself.
It trickles down.
It trickles down. Yes.
Yeah.
It's contagious.
Well, it's an atmosphere. You know, it's a
vibe. It's the environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
okay.
So what do I say about that? I'm shocked and I'm floored, and people need to do better.
Okay. Now, how do we get it done? And by this, we mean, how do we become more civil?
I say we go back to common courtesy. I think we need to go back to the simple, basic rule of treat others as how you want to be treated. But I think simply just going back to saying, please, thank you, you're welcome, I'm sorry, acknowledging others who extend courtesy to you, being mindful of what you say and what you do and how it might impact others, just being more mindful, right? And it could be simple as saying thank you, right? Like I tell my students that I remember there was this practice where people would open doors for me and I wouldn't say thank you when I walked by. And I never noticed how rude that was till my husband one time said to me, he was like, oh, because when my husband opens the door for me, I always say thank you. But then when other people did it, I didn't say anything. And I remember one time we had this conversation and my husband was like, oh, he was like, I hate it when I open the door for people and they don't say thank you. And I looked at him and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm one of those people. Oh no. I was like, is that rude? And he's like, yes, Tenisha, that's really rude if people hold the door. And I was like, I didn't even know. So now I always say thank you. I always say thank you when someone opens the door. So sometimes it's just like acknowledging what people do for you. Don't be so caught up in yourself.
Thinking about other people.
Thinking about other people. I'm like, this person didn't have to hold the door open for me. Like, don't be so rude. So, and that was also during a time, and I also tell my students as well that it took me learning communication to realize how bad of a communicator I really was. I thought I was great, And then I started learning over the years that I was really bad.
Yeah.
So I think learning more, knowing more, doing better, common courtesy, that's how we do better. Make that effort.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the golden rule is good.
Yes.
To practice.
Just to practice.
Even if I fail sometimes, and I do, to keep it in mind.
Absolutely.
And then also, I think that I'm going to be reviewing my syllabus statements I might add a link to the credo.
Oh, yeah.
Just because, and maybe work some of that in there, and maybe try to work in the word ethical a little bit.
Right.
To give the students something to think about. So that's what I'm going to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, what's on your radar, Tenisha?
So it's the summer. Tanisha's still reading things. So I'm still working my way through Mastery by Robert Greene. Love it. It's amazing. I'm on this quest for mastery. If you are on the quest for mastery, I highly recommend reading this book. I'm working my way through it still. But I did finish Coraline. Loved it. Oh my gosh. When I was reading through it, I was like, oh, there were little bitty young people who read this book. This book's a little scary and I'm grown. There were some creepy things in that book, but I loved it. Neil Gaiman is amazing. So the next thing on my list of things to do is to actually watch the movie. Finally, it came out a long time ago and I'm going to watch it. So I was so excited by Coraline. I started reading the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Oh, it's so interesting. Are you familiar with the Graveyard Book?
No.
Oh my goodness. So I guess the premise of it is that I think, I could be wrong, I think it's inspired by the Jungle Book. So there's this idea of like this little kid, this baby, who ends up strolling there's all this drama that happens at the house. Ends up strolling into a graveyard and is raised by the people in the graveyard.
Oh.
Like in the Jungle Book. The Jungle Book, Mowgli was raised by the animals.
Yeah.
So I think it was inspired by the Jungle Book. So I just started that, and it's by the same author of Coraline, Neil Gaiman. Love him, love his writing. And I'll give you a report on what I think about it when I'm done. So that's my fun personal book. And then the professional book that I'm working on, another professional book I'm working on, is Robot Proof. Everybody's been talking about Robot Proof, which is talking about artificial intelligence and higher education. So I'm finally trying to get that read.
Awesome. I can't wait to talk about it with you. We would like to do an upcoming episode where we talk about that book.
Yes, absolutely.
And hopefully our listeners would be interested in that.
Yes.
Maybe you all could grab yourself a copy of that book and read it.
Yes.
And know that we'll have an episode sometime, in the next semester. And maybe you could join in with us and write in the comments your thoughts.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on this book and what you think about it.
You can also email us at twoprofsinapod@gmail.com and share your thoughts with us, and we might share them on air with our listeners.
That's great.
So if you have something you want to say about that book, let us know, and we'll try to work you in.
Absolutely.
Tanisha, I don't have anything on my radar except that you said Infinity Wars is out, and of course, our listeners may not hear this podcast immediately. It might go into the bucket and come out in a month or so.
Yeah.
So Infinity Wars will have been out for much longer by then.
Yes.
But yeah.
Still depressing.
Yeah.
But worth the journey. Love it. And
we also do want to do. We just need to tell our listeners that Cheryl, our production manager.
We love Cheryl.
Has lent us her computer today because the one we normally use is being repaired. We just want to tell our listeners that all her keys on the computer are little Star Wars stickers.
And they are amazing.
I
am geeking out.
It's so nerdy. But it is pretty amazing. I wish you could see.
Awesome.
Maybe. Oh, you know what? This will be our picture for this episode.
Yes. We're going to sneak in a picture.
So you can see it. All right. What's our nugget?
So nugget, I said it earlier. It's so cheesy. But treat others how you want to be treated. It's an oldie, but a goodie that we need to be reminded of.
Awesome. Boom.
All right, so I think that's it for today. I'm Tenisha.
I'm Beth.
Thanks for joining us today on Two Profs in a Pod. Join us on our next episode when we talk about difficult conversation.